All right, we're here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com. Whether you're watching on Twitch, Periscope, the website, thank you so much for joining us for the first edition of 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Doring is here with me to kick off the show. Josh, how you doing?
I'm ready to get this thing started. How are you?
You know, I'm good. This is a perfect a perfect Monday to start this and it wasn't completely on purpose, but we're hanging out here and we've got the beginning of the college basketball season. The college football playoff is under attack, essentially, from COVID-19. The NFL playoff picture gets more and more interesting every day because teams beat who they're not supposed to, or teams who shouldn't win are winning. And on top of that, Charles Barkley and Phil Mickelson are beating Steph Curry and Peyton Manning in a golf match. I absolutely love it. So we've got a lot to talk about on today's show, and I'm really excited about it. Before we hop in, let's touch on a couple things that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start with college basketball at the top. Nothing too incredibly interesting happened in the football world to trump the fact that there was a start to the college basketball season. So that's where we're going to start here today, and then move into some of our new segments. We'll get to those as we get to them. Humor me, please. Winners and losers from the weekend, and then get to football, both college and the NFL, later in the show. But there's no more appropriate place to start, Josh, than at the very top of the college basketball world. You start prior to the season. I mean, there was some jockeying for who's the best team in the country, whether it's Gonzaga, Baylor, Virginia, Villanova. It looked like everyone sort of had a leg to stand on. We're less than a week into the season, and there's really only two teams that have a leg left to stand on. Villanova losing to Virginia Tech, almost a year exactly from when Virginia Tech beat Michigan State. I believe it was out in Maui, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Sixth consecutive season, Virginia Tech has a top 5 win,
and they're like 7-3 or something dumb in their last 10 games against top 3 opponents, top 5 opponents, something. They're just getting the job done. Since before Mike White got there, now that Mike White is there, they're all over the place. And then of course Virginia does this thing where they lose to a mid-major team. This time it's San Francisco. So now you've got these two teams in Baylor and Gonzaga, the teams that really performed over the last week. First question for you, and then we'll sort of just dive into these 4 teams. Is the top tier, is the elite tier still Gonzaga and Baylor, or is it right now just Gonzaga, based on the fact that they have a top 6 win over Kansas and just have things that I don't think even people realize the talent that they had quite to the extent that they actually have it. Is it Baylor and Gonzaga for you, or is it just Gonzaga right now?
To me, it's both. And I was really curious to see Baylor because when you have a delay due to COVID and Gonzaga has already beaten Kansas and then destroyed Auburn, I was sort of at the point where, and you and I were texting about this, I don't want to hear about anybody else after what Gonzaga did. But then Baylor comes out and absolutely demolishes Washington. They looked really good. They're getting their balanced scoring attack. And I'm a big believer in this Baylor team. I was a big believer in last year's Baylor team because of the amount of guards that can go give you 20 points on any given day. I have some questions, specifically whether they can do it throughout the Big 12 and win a conference title because they fell off at the end of last year, whether you can make up for everything Freddie Gillespie gave you. But that's down the road. To me, it's 2 teams at this moment in time. They just look too good for me to dismiss them. And as much as I have battled for them over the past year and a half, I'm not willing to take them out of that top tier yet. But this is not 1A and 1B to me. There's Gonzaga, and then there's Baylor, and then there's everybody else. Because when you're getting the 101 points that Gonzaga got in those 2 games from Drew Timme and Corey Kispert, and Jalen Suggs is quickly becoming one of my favorite players in college basketball, I was wondering whether he was going to be able to make a massive impact right away, just because there are so many good players on that team. They don't need him. They have Andrew Nemhard.
Right. And not only could he, would he get the chance to?
Right, exactly.
Would he be? And the fact that you have the luxury of putting Andrew Nembhard in the backcourt as a backup is absolutely ridiculous, and that in and of itself speaks to just how deep this team is. But the more I think about it, the more that makes sense, because until, it's been a week and a half, 2 weeks now, you weren't sure that Andrew Nembhard was going to be allowed to play this season.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that Jalen Suggs was operating as Joel Ayayi's backcourt sort of duo, the guy who was going to fit in there with Drew Timme, Corey Kispert, and Joel Ayayi. It makes sense that he's the other guy, Jalen Suggs. At least that's the way it was going to start, because you weren't sure that Nembhard was going to be there. So maybe if Nembhard is guaranteed eligibility months ago, then it looks a little different. But I think it's fair to say that's how Mark Few was operating, just in case he didn't get that. He got that waiver denied. With that being said, though, I mean, Jalen Suggs is at least right now the All-American caliber player that nobody thought was going to be an All-American.
Yep.
And he was the freshman of the year candidate that nobody was really talking about. It was, Evan Mobley at USC. It was Cade Cunningham at Oklahoma State, of course. Both of those guys, of course, deserving the props that they were getting. But 18 points, 4 rebounds, 7 assists per game. Now, granted, it's a small sample size, but he clearly has that it factor. He took over the game at the end of that Kansas game. It wasn't Kispert, it wasn't Ayayi, it wasn't somebody else. It was Suggs, and he was making all of the plays. He's a brilliant passer, way better passer than I thought he was. He's super athletic. He plays with a lot of intensity. I mean, Gonzaga was the best team in the country, in my opinion, before they had an All-American caliber freshman on their team. And that's just, it speaks to what they have that they didn't have last year. And that's, or that they haven't necessarily had in the past. And that's an elite recruit to go along with the high-level transfers, with the veteran Gonzaga program players. They're stupid impressive and stupid talented, even before Jalen Suggs did what he did.
Yeah, and that was what sort of tipped the scales for me, was not only the emergence of Suggs, but the fact that you went from, and we talked about this on our podcast, I'm a big Brian Antoine fan, but Brian Antoine is not playing for Villanova right now.
No, he's not.
So you're switching that out with getting Andrew Nembhard eligible, plus what you're getting from Suggs. And you said intensity. That's the other part that I was blown away by, is some of these freshmen are, for obvious reasons, taking a little bit of time to sort of figure out how to operate in this college basketball world. That dude came in and was acting like he belonged and had been there for 3 years and was playing his final year of college basketball from the minute he took the court.
Absolutely.
It's not just what he's giving you on the box score. It's the presence he has and the confidence he has.
And then you add the fact that Corey Kispert and Drew Timme have not been slouches either. I mean, Kispert is performing like the first team All-American many predicted him to be, 24 points, 5 rebounds. And then Drew Timme is the best player in the sport that nobody really knew about last year. And part of that is just because, part of that's because the average college basketball fan doesn't know the depth of Gonzaga, just like they don't really know the depth of Duke. I mean, they just, but Drew Timme was just part of the depth of Gonzaga last year. There's no NCAA tournament. You have Killian Tilly. 26.5 points, 8 rebounds so far per game. That's ridiculous. He's so skilled. He plays really hard. He does all the little things that you've come to expect from Gonzaga big men over the last 5 years or so. He's very good, and I always thought he was on that first team all come out team.
Yep.
That people were gonna know who he was quickly, but I didn't think they were gonna know him like this, and I didn't think they were gonna know him like this quite this fast. He's been spectacular as well. Everything about Gonzaga so far has been better than I thought it was going to be, which is saying something because of just how ridiculous it was to start.
Yeah. I'm also curious about Villanova. I kept watching them and wanting to see more of them because it just didn't look great at times.
Yeah.
And they had real trouble defending the paint, stopping penetration from guards in the first half of that Boston College game. Then they figured it out and were able to win. They looked better against Arizona State, did a phenomenal job on Remy Martin. So I thought, okay, maybe that was just a poor half. And I was ready to start talking about how, look at how quickly they figured things out. Look at how quickly they made those adjustments. Mm-hmm. I'm really impressed by that. And then you get to Virginia Tech, and it's the same story as it was against Boston College. Something with these ACC teams, apparently. They couldn't defend the paint. They couldn't keep players out of the paint. And in that game in particular, one of your other problems was that Colin Gillespie was sort of left on an island. Yep. He didn't get the help he needed, and he's not going to go give you 35. He had a really good game, but Jeremiah Robinson-Earl had a very poor game. And so all of a sudden you're in this dogfight with Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech finds a way to pull off another upset. I'm very curious to see what happens from here, because I was very high on this team, and so far it just has not been pretty. They were good against Arizona State, didn't really let them back into that game. Mm-hmm. Like I said, did a really good job on Remy Martin, but that's about the only thing to hang your hat on so far, which is concerning considering they played 3 times.
Well, they're just not playing good enough defense yet.
Yeah.
I mean, opponents shooting 52% from inside the 3-point line, 38% outside of it, 140th and 174th nationally so far. Now, I know small sample sizes, but Nova wins the 3-point line. That's what they do. And they haven't really been doing that. And that's even with shooting the ball relatively well. I mean, in that game against Tech, it was a bad shooting night and they were 9 of 25. You know, like they're gonna shoot it well. The thing that scares me is their depth. Only 6 guys played more than 4 minutes against Virginia Tech, and the starters all played like 38 plus. And there was only one guy who came off the bench playing real minutes, and I believe that was Cole Swider. He played 18. So that's not the depth of a team that I'm going to bet on in March. It's just not. And because you got to have somebody producing from somewhere, whether it's your Dante DiVincenzo's or, I mean, I don't see a Dante DiVincenzo on that bench, especially if Brian Antoine's not going to be playing. I'm surprised that he's not getting any leash whatsoever, like can't even get on the floor. Oh, he re-hurt himself. Yeah, he got hurt again.
That's what I was gonna say. Right. You got him and Demir Cosby-Roundtree, who that is your depth, and both those guys are unavailable right now. So that's at least part of it. But you would like to see somebody else step up who wasn't expecting to see minutes this year, but here we are. It's COVID. That's a fair concern in and of itself. Even if you want to point to the guys that aren't there right now, is you're going to have guys unavailable at times this year. So can your 9th, 10th guys in the depth chart, your sort of second tier bench players, are they ready to contribute when your 6th man isn't there, or when one of your starters test positive or whatever it might be? If you're just relying on 6, 7, 8 guys, you're probably going to be in trouble at times. Maybe it won't hurt you in the NCAA tournament because they'll all be healthy and available, but there are going to be times.
In theory, they don't test positive for COVID.
Right. There are going to be times where you're going to have to deal with situations like this, and specifically on the defensive end, there's just no real excuse. Yeah, they just have to be better. They haven't looked like a fundamentally sound Villanova team yet.
I would agree, and I will say I like Caleb Daniels, the Tulane transfer. I think he's played well. I think he's a microwave scorer that can. I mean, microwave is not super fair to him in terms of. I mean, he's more consistent than just a microwave scorer. But he's that guy I think is a little bit more well built to take over a game if you need him to. He scored a lot, but prior to transferring, he's just sort of he's built like a scorer, he's kind of built like Miles Powell. He reminds me of Miles Powell in the way he's built, and he can just get a bucket. I think he gets a little isolation heavy and a little dribble too muchy at times, but I like him. I was surprised. I'm surprised by how much his scoring has translated to the college level so far. 16, just under 17 points a game at Tulane. Through 3 games, he's averaging 15. He's not going to do a whole lot other than score it in terms of facilitating or anything like that. But he is... I like the way he scores the ball, and he seems to compete. So I like the way he fits into there. But maybe this Nova team will change some when they actually get some depth back. But you're right. I haven't been impressed like I typically am impressed by Villanova teams in the non-conference. Because even though, I mean, they handled Arizona State, but it's not like they walked all over Arizona State, which is a good basketball team and one that if I could go back and predict the Pac-12's rankings differently, I probably have them a little bit higher than I originally did because that's a good basketball team. But with that being said, not super impressed by them yet.
And real quick on Virginia, before we get off of this, to me this is very simple. There's a formula. The reason they won that national championship was because they scored the ball at a much more efficient rate, and they had multiple guys that could score 20-plus a game with your Kyle guys and your DeAndre Hunters and such. Mm-hmm. First of all, let's also acknowledge that the San Francisco team has been good the past few seasons. They're building a very good program over there. It's not like this is some random team. Now, it's also San Francisco. I'm not saying everybody should have been picking San Francisco to win this game. Mm-hmm. But that was a sort of sneaky good team that they came up against. But if Sam Hauser's not going to score 19 a game, they're not going to win the ACC. To me, that's what we learned. I don't really have much to take away other than that he has to be the go-to scorer for this team. Otherwise, it's going to look like last year's Virginia team and the Virginia team that lost to UMBC, where if something goes wrong, if somebody scores 65, 70 points on them, if they don't shoot the ball well, they can lose to anybody on any given day because they don't have that option B where they can score 72 points and beat you 72-68 or 80-78 or something because Sam Hauser has a really good game.
Right.
He was good, and then he was not good against San Francisco, and to me, that's the difference.
And also, I want to know, is the Rice transfer Trey Murphy closer to the 21 points per game guy he was in game 1 or the 4 points on 0 field goals he was in game 2? Because that matters too, but I think that the biggest question here is, does this offense only go when Sam Hauser goes? And right. So far the answer is yes, and that's not good. I'm also, in that game, they shot better, turned it over fewer times, took 14 more free throws than San Francisco, but San Francisco went 13 of 28 from the three-point line. If UVA is not going to defend the three-point line, the formula doesn't work. Like, it's that simple. They went 3 of 12 from deep. They're not going to shoot a ton of threes. They're not, and it's not like any UVA team is ridiculous from beyond the arc. So it's not like you have a ton of margin for error there anyways. But if you're going to you can't give up 13 of 28 from deep if you're hanging your hat on the defensive end like you're going to. That's 39 of San Francisco's 61 points right there. That's a lot of points. Clearly the defense is awesome. They gave up 13 of 28 from deep and still only lost by 1. Like, that's the other takeaway from it, but that also just shows you that if one thing goes wrong on the offensive end and the other team makes some shots on the defensive end, then Virginia's at the very least going to be in really tough basketball games to win. So I think we're much closer to, the UMBC losing team than the team that lost the national championship the following year. Even if you feel, really good about Sam Hauser as your go-to scorer, there just isn't more than one of them like there was on that Virginia team. We're going to take a quick break, come back with some secondary college basketball takeaways. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.